Chapter 15, Flute Effects. As I stated earlier, I grew up in Tampa, Florida, and at that time, this is during the 1970s, there were over 350 nightclubs in the Tampa Bay, Clearwater, St. Petersburg area, and every single one of them had live music, believe it or not. It was a musician's paradise. On Sunday nights, several of the clubs would deviate from their normal music routine and offer a night of jamming where outside musicians could come sit in and jam with the club musicians. I was just out of high school and started college at University of South Florida. The drinking age was 21, but I was allowed to participate as long as I did not order any liquor. Most of the musicians in these clubs were real pros that had toured nationally and worked with various record labels. They had found their retirement gigs in Florida. I used to go as many times as I could. It was a great experience for me because I knew nothing about jazz or improvisation. They would bring me on the stage, start the next song, and after a while they would hand off the mic to me and tell me it was my turn. Holy crap! I did not know the jazz tune, the key, or anything. But what I discovered was that after a few major catastrophic failures, I began to hear some of the changes. I was starting to develop my ear. I began to understand what were the different sections of the song, key changes, etc. It was a real education for me. Being the only flutist, they were constantly asking me to come back and keep jamming with them. I jammed with hundreds of musicians over the next few years. Rockers, jazzers, great Latin musicians fresh from Cuba, and many more. What I learned is that there are many styles to improvisation. Many of the jazzers I jammed with were incredible sax players. These guys had played on many hit records. The only sax players I knew were from my high school band, and they could only produce one type of sound, which was bright, harsh, and lifeless. What I discovered from the pros was that they could produce multiple sounds out of their horns. Their sound could be very bright, very dark, or muffled. They could growl through their horn. They could almost scream while they were playing. They could make the horn sound like it was crying. I think you get the picture. When they took those different sound techniques and added it to what they were developing with their improv solo, it blew my mind. They brought their music to life. I knew at that moment I wanted to learn how to do that with my flute. The flute can be a very sterile instrument, particularly from our classical flute upbringing point of view. Here are some techniques I have developed over the years that I can add to my music when it is appropriate. First, singing and playing through the flute at the same time. Next, growling through the flute. Next, a fuzzy type of tone. Next, ghost tones. Sax players have mastered this technique. Next, smear descending arpeggios while overblowing. Next, another technique while you're overblowing is to play your overtones starting at the highest notes and descending, or vice versa. Multiphonics. Dave Valentine was the master of this technique. This is where you can play more than one note at the same time. Jethro Tull stuff. For people who are in my age bracket, I grew up with a band out of England called Jethro Tull. I used to listen to their music all the time. The band leader, Ian Anderson, was a flutist, singer. He did all kind of really cool rock flute stuff. And so I would definitely recommend Nestor Torres, snare drum style of tonguing. He's a Latin jazz flutist currently. Another technique out there is extreme darkness or broadness in tone. And lastly, the beatboxer. I would suggest that you go to YouTube and listen to these artists to help you learn the following effects. Nestor Torres. Tonguing that sounds like a snare drum. Extreme darkness on the flute, almost sounds sax-like. Smears. Overblowing on tremolos. Latin-style solos. Listen to the rhythmical styles used. Lots of third and fourth octave playing. We're talking about D4 and E4. bending tones, and ghost tones. As I talked about the band Jethro Tull earlier, you need to go listen to some of their stuff from Mr. Ian Anderson. Listen to his overblowing, his singing through the flute while playing, lots of overblowing tremolos and rock-style solos. Another great flute player is a gentleman by the name Dave Valentine. He had world-class straight-ahead jazz improvisation, great Latin elements, multiphonics carried to the extreme, and incredible double triple tonguing. And another gentleman out there is Hubert Laws, and with him you get world-class jazz improvisation mixed with incredible classical elements and technique. He has wide diversity of jazz styles, and he's a master technician on the flute. And lastly, Mr. James Moody, world-class straight-ahead jazz player, master technician use of jazz theory.